Story 1. The one that haunts me is a young mom who posted in a Facebook group asking how to encourage her boyfriend to hold their baby. The baby was 10 months old, and he had never once held her because he said, "That's your job." Story 2. My daughter has a peanut allergy, so my wife was trying to get her an accommodation at school, and they were ignoring, delaying, and generally dicking her around. I took a day off work to handle it. They were all, "Yes, Mr. Dragons," right away. My wife is still pissed about it 20 years later. I kind of joked it off. You know, what do you give an angry gorilla? Whatever the fuck it wants. Now she'll tell me to go use that gorilla privilege. Story 3, maybe not the most unfair, but certainly the most ridiculous. There is a YouTuber couple, Paul and Morgan, who are Christian fundamentalists and believe a good wife must submit to her husband. Paul does not have a job because he is pursuing his dream of becoming a professional pickleball player. He is constantly gone, spending full-time hours playing pickleball, training, and visiting spas and recovery facilities. He comes from a well-off family and his parents finance much of his lifestyle. He does not earn money from pickleball because he is not very good and the sport is not lucrative. Morgan was the player first and had been doing well. Paul only started after Morgan, declared pickleball his one true passion, and expected her to stay home with the kids while he trained 8 hours a day. Morgan was consistently a significantly better player, but she had to stay home with the children and could not play because she was effectively a single parent with limited time and energy. Did he have prior experience as a professional athlete? No. Morgan struggled with mental health, including overwhelm, burnout, and breakdowns. Did Paul ever step back to help with childcare or the mental load? No. Morgan then had an aortic dissection, was placed on stroke watch, and had to significantly limit herself physically. She was not allowed to pick up her children because the strain could be fatal. How did Paul respond? He did not step up. He insisted that, as the man of the house, pursuing professional pickleball was his role and he would not take time away because he was trying to go pro. He left his wife home alone with their young children and continued his routine. She had to call neighbors to lift her child out of the crib because her husband would not take time off from training. He left her, on stroke watch, alone with babies while knowing she could die from lifting them. If there had been an emergency and she died trying to move the children, he treated it as God's plan, as if God wanted his favored son, Pickle Paul, to go pro. Story 4. My parents, both of whom had full-time corporate careers, earned equal incomes, but my mother did all the cooking, cleaning, organizing, and housekeeping, and she took care of my youngest sister. We mowed the lawn, did the laundry, and washed the dishes once we were old enough. My father claimed he was doing so much for the home, but all he did was take the car in for maintenance a couple of times a year and change light bulbs. When my mother went on business trips, her responsibilities were assigned to me, the oldest daughter, including cooking and picking up my sister from daycare when I was barely a teenager, rather than to my brother, who was 7 years older and enjoyed cooking and caring for our sister. Needless to say, to him the divorce came out of nowhere, while my siblings and I wondered why it had not happened sooner. Story 5. I know a woman who had very busy weekends because that was when she usually cleaned, did laundry, and bought groceries. She would then go to her boyfriend's and his parents' houses to clean and do laundry every week. Story 6. When I used to go to Thanksgiving at my maternal grandparents' house, all the men would end up getting drunk in the living room while the women cleaned up after dinner. Thankfully, I am no longer invited. Story 7. My mom and stepfather's marriage is strange. She does much more work and earns more money than he does, yet he still expects her to cook, clean, and do all the other traditionally ladylike tasks. Story 8. I know a man who moved his wife and child across the country because he was training to be a fighter pilot. He got very close. He was actually flying fighter jets and had only a few months of training left. Then coronavirus disease 2019 hit. He refused to get vaccinated, and the Air Force discharged him. I do not care about your opinion on coronavirus disease 2019 or the vaccine, but to make your wife quit her career, she is an engineer, by the way, and leave her family to follow your dream, only to voluntarily abandon that dream moments before it was realized, is extremely unfair, selfish, and generally awful. Story 9. I watched a friend rise to become a high-ranking lawyer, only to come home to a filthy house she was expected to clean by herself while also serving as the primary caregiver for her children, so her partner could play video games in another room. He worked half as many hours as she did but refused to do women's work. Story 10. This is a long one. It is about my mom and my ex-stepdad. My mom got pregnant and married him when I was 15. He lived 2 hours away and told her to quit her job and move there, saying he would take care of everything as the provider. I stayed in my hometown with my dad because I was enrolled in a competitive school that required an application. My stepdad was supposed to take care of the finances, but he cut my mom off completely and would not even give her gas money to visit me. He said my dad should have been paying for everything and driving me 2 hours to visit my mom. He expected my mom to do all the cooking and cleaning during a high-risk pregnancy and expected her to get a job. He did not believe her when she said no one would hire a pregnant woman and told her to deliver pizzas if necessary when she was a 40-year-old pregnant woman. When she was home, he would get mad if she was not perfectly put together with hair and makeup. When my brother was born, she went back to work immediately. She worked 40 hours a week and he expected her to do all the housework, cleaning, childcare, and to give all her money to him. I visited maybe 2 or 3 days a month and he treated me like a maid, making me clean up things I had not dirted. One time I made food and put water in a pan to soak and he put the pan in my bed because he was so angry the kitchen had one dirty pan. My brother is now a teenager. Does he have chores? No, absolutely none. His dad has hired a maid to clean. Story 11. My parents' relationship. Both my mother and father worked. My mother still does. My mother cleaned the house herself weekly and, as far as I know, still does. There was never visible dust in common areas. She kept it immaculate. My father never helped clean. She was the primary cook except when grilling, which he handled. My father decided to renovate the house himself and did impulsive things, such as buying a trapezoidal window on sale even though it did not match the rest of the house and my mother did not consent. He installed about 100 lights and 6 switches in a small family room. He tore down a wall, prevented others from working on the house, and left exposed electrical wires hanging for years. Money was an issue, but he did not have to do demolition and leave things unfinished for months or years. She did not consent to windows spanning most of the wall in a small bathroom, so, unless the shade was down, anyone could see into the bathroom. He made all the major renovation decisions, did not want anyone else working on the house, and did allow people to repair the foundation. He expected my mother to work longer hours, about 30 hours more per week than he did, while also maintaining the house and cooking. He disliked when she sunbathed and read a book after 6 days of work, complained about her cooking, tried to prevent her from having dinner with coworkers, and started major fights if she went out for anything other than groceries, work, or errands. He was very controlling. She pushed back only slightly, visiting her family overseas and going out to dinner with coworkers once or twice a year. Ultimately, my mother stayed, saying she could not leave someone after they had been together for so long. They also agreed that people should not have opposite gender friends besides their spouse, and they tried to enforce that on me. They were both racist and tried to prevent me from having black friends. They would have been appalled if I dated outside my race. They believed a woman's place was limited and that people should restrict friends to the same gender and race. I always feared having a marriage like my parents. In my teenage years, I thought I would never marry or even date. I planned to have sex with trusted male friends and raise one child on my own in my 30s. I was not going to pursue co-parenting or courtship. I think it is a traditional stereotype that women do more emotional labor in a relationship. Women often do more domestic labor inside the home, while outdoor tasks like mowing the lawn are seen as the man's role. They may absorb insults and provide emotional and domestic support to their husbands. A healthy relationship is a two-way street. Partners should support each other in all ways. No one should use their spouse as an emotional dumping ground or a domestic servant. Good communication and mutual respect are needed from both sides. I have a partner who pays half the rent and cleans the apartment with me. He encourages open communication and discussing issues. He cooks sometimes, mostly simple dishes like boiling pasta with store-bought sauce, since he never really learned to cook. I am trying to teach him more complicated recipes over time, We like cooking large meals together once or twice a month. He is very good at chopping vegetables, so there is some hope. He is dedicated and loving, and he pulls his weight in the relationship. That is enough for me. Story 12. My ex changed our daughter's diaper only once and would never be alone with her. The one time he did was in the hospital. The diaper was soiled and he refused to do it again. Because he worked and I was at home with her, he assumed it was all my responsibility. Story 13. A Catholic woman in a group meeting was deeply unhappy in her marriage, with many children she did not want, and she had neglected her health, hair, and personal appearance. She was candid about feeling exhausted and unloved and felt religion was to blame. I stared at her, hoping she would break free and build a life. Story 14. My friend's parents are boomer fools. In the 2000s, the father and the mother each earned $50,000 a year as government employees, so their salaries are public information. Despite earning the same salary and working similar jobs, the mother did all of the childcare, cooking, cleaning, household project management, and staying in contact with relatives. Now that they are both retired, the father sits in front of the television all day. The mother still cooks, cleans, manages household projects, including budgeting, meal planning, grocery shopping, picking up prescriptions, dealing with the bank, paying bills, and booking doctor appointments, and she continues to stay in contact with relatives. Story 15. Doctors tell women that if they develop a serious long-term illness, they should be prepared for divorce because men are 7 times more likely to leave their sick wives than women are to leave their sick husbands. When the wife is sick, 21% of marriages end in divorce. When the husband is sick, about 3% of marriages do. Story 16. My soon-to-be ex-husband would not allow me to mow the lawn, even though he worked 80 hours a week and it usually rained on his one day off, so the lawn became a disaster. Once I finally got fed up and mowed it, he did not speak to me for hours and told our marriage counselor he felt emasculated. Story 17. I had a partner who refused to let me spend time with female friends out of jealousy, yet she did not recognize the hypocrisy of spending time with male friends. Fortunately, she is an ex, and I am now happy with a woman who is morally sound. Story 18. Growing up, my mother told me I needed to be agreeable, quiet, and thin, or a man would never want me. Meanwhile, my father regularly hit my mother and never did a single chore. Yet I was blamed for even pointing out the unfair treatment. Story 19. I have known a lot of guys who expect women to agree to humiliating, painful sexual acts that affect their physical and mental health. They act shocked if a woman turns it around on them and asks him to go first. Story 20. I do not get to spend his money or tell him what to do with it. I am home with the baby. It is somehow my fault that there is no money for bills because there is no one to watch the baby while I work. But when I do get money, something always comes up with his car. Yes, I have started hiding money. Story 21. It is a bit painful to see how many comments echo similar views about women's roles and burdens here. Not negating men at all, just showing how deeply society has ingrained the role of a woman as servant, helper, and giver. Story 22. I am a lesbian, but my ex decided that me presenting a little more masculine meant I was the man of the relationship in a stupid, toxic way. That meant I had to pay for everything, initiate any intimacy, and I was always the one buying her flowers. She never did anything. For me, for Valentine's Day, she actually cheated on me the day before. She also did nothing for my birthday while I did a lot for her, and I was the only one who cleaned. In the end, she became abusive, so I kicked her out, and she lied to the police, so I pressed charges. Story 23. The one that stands out in my experience was when I was in a store with my ex and his daughter. We had been dating for a while, but outings with his daughter were still new, and while we walked around the store, the clerk turned to me and asked if his daughter could have something she was asking about. I was completely blindsided because she didn't look like me. She was sticking close to her father, and I had no idea if she was allowed to have it. Because I was a woman, the clerk assumed I was responsible for the child. She was a great kid, but I was not an authority figure to her yet. I was just her father's friend, so she was confused too. It was no big deal at the time, but I am still somewhat upset about it. Story 24. A former friend of my husband once proudly proclaimed that he had never changed a nappy, which is called a diaper in American English, on any of his children. I looked at his partner. She gave me a weak smile that broke my heart. My husband promptly mocked him relentlessly for being so incompetent or lazy that he could not even change his own children. They later broke up, and we sided with his partner in the divorce and left him. Story 25. When a woman is expected to leave the job that provides her income to take a more demanding job that makes no money, requires more hours, is dangerous and frequently deadly or causes permanent injury, and offers less recognition and even shame from many people, so she must rely on someone else for an allowance and hope that person is responsible with both of their futures and will not treat her poorly or leave her while she has a newborn. Yes, women were considered property not long ago. Traditional roles do not make sense for women. Story 26. When we became parents, my husband and I split the responsibilities as evenly as possible. Our lives were turned upside down. We were both emotional and sleep-deprived. Everyone, from family to doctors, checked in to make sure the baby and I were okay. But nobody, not even his family, asked how he was doing. He was completely sidelined. It felt like nobody cared about what he was going through. He went through the full-on baby blues, the hardest mental and emotional period of his life. It often seemed that the only person who noticed or cared was me. I was overwhelmed by new parenthood, so I could not be his entire support system, and he did not want to put his struggles on my shoulders either. That was a tough time. Story 27. For me, it was when our children were babies. Whenever we went out to eat, they would inevitably fuss, and I would be the one to hold them while trying to eat. My husband never did. Story 28. Had an argument with my partner about who would do the chores if we were married. We do pretty much the same line of work. His job includes more exposure to the weather and some office duties, but we both work long hours doing manual labor and customer service. I said it's fair to split the chores. He argued he usually works longer hours and that his job is harder. Agreed his job can be harder sometimes, but he often has several breaks while I work continuously, do manual labor in heels, and frequently drive long hours to other job sites. I suggested that if one of us is too tired, the other can take that day's chores, but he never agreed and kept insisting his job is harder and that women usually do the chores. I was shaking my head. Story 29. Conservative male partners treat their wives like subhuman slaves. Story 30. In my culture, it is customary for the wife to handle finances, even when the husband is the sole breadwinner, because women are more thrifty or some similar nonsense. As a result, many of my male friends hand over the entirety of their bank accounts to their stay-at-home spouses and live on a monthly allowance of $150 to $200 despite earning six-figure incomes, while their partners maintain multiple very important person cards at fancy brands and department stores. Story 31. This is not the most unfair thing, but this thread reminded me of being in my early 20s. I was feminist and educated, yet I accepted doing all the housework for my male partners because of their learned incompetence and laziness. Story 32. My ex and I both worked full-time jobs, and he did almost no housework or childcare. A few months after we split, it was Easter. He made my 12-year-old daughter, his only daughter, cook dinner for him and her 4 older brothers. I read the boys the riot act when they came home. That never happened again. Story 33. I'm not sure this is unfair so much as ludicrous. When I went to the wedding of some friends from university, one of the readings was the Bible passage that begins, "Wives, submit to your husbands." The vicar giving the sermon started with, "Wow, you picked a contentious passage for me to speak about," and then went on to say how it was absolutely correct. He said, husbands and wives could discuss things, but ultimately the husband should make the decisions. In fact, although his wife had gone and looked at all the possible primary schools their child could attend, he was the one who made the final choice. He then dropped the fact that his wife is a teacher. It was only because I did not want to upset my friends that I did not walk out. Story 34. All responsibility for birth control is placed on women, while men take none. Women are expected to undergo invasive sterilization surgery, yet men often decline the much less invasive vasectomy. Story 35. It is not the biggest problem, just the latest annoyance. I am astounded at how infrequently men have to go pee compared to women. It is truly unfair. Story 36. I have a female friend from China. She and her mother immigrated to the United States more than 30 years ago. Her family is worth billions in China in United States dollars. Because she and her mother are women, they receive nothing. Her male cousin lives alone in San Francisco and has never had a job. Their grandparents pay all of his living expenses. Meanwhile, my friend struggled financially with a child with special needs and was driving a 15-year-old car, and her grandparents did not help them at all. The cousin is expected to inherit billions of dollars, while my friend will inherit nothing. Story 37. My sister brags about her husband because he cooks once a week. I have been there while he is cooking, and my sister and I cannot have a conversation because he constantly interrupts to ask what step to do next or whether she should check that everything looks okay. My sister may as well do it. She tells me how organized he is and how he makes life easier because he pays all the bills from their joint account, takes the cars to the mechanic, and registers them once a year. He sometimes walks the dog if she asks, but she usually walks it before and after work. My sister spends her weekends cleaning, doing laundry, driving the kids around, and meal prepping. She sometimes finds time to go to the gym for an hour. They both work full-time. My sister's job is much more demanding mentally and physically, and her commute is much longer. I am single and child-free with a dog. I do everything she and her husband call help, except driving the kids around. She thinks I need to find a partner, but I tell her she is not selling that lifestyle to me. Story 38. Many women give up their youth, forgoing job skills to raise a family. This leaves them with fewer options. My mother never had the chance to build a career. As an adult, I judged her as lacking ambition but had to learn empathy. My grandmother never worked. The family had money and very traditional gender roles. Having a career was considered masculine. The expectation was to marry at 20. My mother worked the front counter at the family store to help my father through college and earned a cosmetology degree along the way. She did not get to attend college for anything else because my sister was born. I was able to spend my 20s exploring and growing, and I even had a short first marriage. Meanwhile, she was raising 2 children and helping my father finish school. There was no time left for her to explore or grow. I see how unhappy my parents are in their marriage, and it makes me sad because she never had a chance to leave due to financial dependence or to experience independence. I was able to leave my unhappy marriage in my 20s because I had options. Story 39. My brother's former wife essentially abused being a stay-at-home mother. Her mother was retired and lived with them, but his former wife refused to work. As a result, my brother worked more than 80 hours a week, often 15-hour days, yet was still expected to come home and cook, clean, and do yard work despite 2 women being at home full-time. After their divorce, she was given custody of the children because he worked so much. He was ordered to pay alimony and child support based on his overtime income and required to keep working long hours for years. He went to court this year to seek a reduction in those payments because he was on the verge of homelessness. We are living together now and his body was being physically injured by the strain of the job. He now pays almost $3,000 per month. His former wife lives about 1,500 miles away. If he wants to see the children, he must buy all of their plane tickets and pay for her accommodations, or travel out of state himself. Otherwise, she refuses to facilitate visits. Family court has made it clear it does not prioritize his parental rights and does not consider how unfair the situation is, both as a parent and as a person who is exhausting himself to pay bills based on past income. Story 40. My ex-wife filed for divorce in 2022 because, for the first time, she earned more money than I did and believed that good husbands should earn more than their wives. Story 41. I will add something that has not been mentioned. Men are expected to be constantly horny, and if they are not, something is considered wrong with them and they are seen as less of a man. Story 42. See Lydia Poet and all the women in history who did not receive credit for their brilliance and hard work. Story 43. My mom had cancer. She worked through most of it, despite not needing to financially, and still cooked every meal for my dad. I have no idea how they are still together. At this point, it is codependency. Story 44. When people assume only women can be victims of abuse, male victims become invisible. Story 45. My dad has 4 daughters and never changed a diaper or bathed any of us, apparently because he thought looking after children was a woman's job. Once my mom told me she was out to dinner with friends and my dad phoned her, furious that he had to change my sister's diaper. When I was 17, he asked where we kept the pots and pans because he had never opened the kitchen drawer. He did not know how to load and start the dishwasher, nor how to start the washing machine. Yes, I'm waiting for her to divorce him. Story 46. Men and husbands are being treated as and expected to be emotional punching bags. Rather than taking accountability for their own emotional regulation or mental health struggles, I have seen some women emotionally abuse their partners and expect them to take it like a man. In my family situation, it was not a problem with the division of responsibilities. My mother had a lot of trauma and mental health struggles and was furious at the patriarchy. My father was a quiet, non-combative man who had learned it was easier to stay silent and accept it than to stand up for himself. Story 47. My sister-in-law can't travel anywhere on her own because her husband will not change a diaper. They have 2 boys together, one who is 23 months old and a newborn, and she has another boy from a previous relationship who is 7. Anytime she travels, she has to take at least the 2 who are still in diapers. If she travels without them, her husband will take the kids to his mother's house so she can watch them while he spends time with his car friends. He's gone every weekend to some bonfire or garage beer drinking session, but she has to move heaven and earth to get a weekend with her mother and my wife. He's also thrown tantrums and cursed at her over having to do any amount of laundry, dishes, or cleaning himself. At this point, my sister-in-law knows how we feel about him, so I think she doesn't bother to share most of it. I really don't like that man. Story 48. My parents both had very demanding full-time jobs. When my father came home, he went to his private room with his TV to relax, smoke, and eat chips. My mother had to pick us up from school, do the grocery shopping, cook dinner, clean the apartment, spend time with us, and help us with homework when needed. During that time, my father was in his own world, ignoring us. This is hard to forgive and forget. One of my cousins is an industrial engineer, very smart and top of her class. She married and gave up her career so her husband could have a career while she took care of their children. She said it was their only option. I highly doubt it. Story 49. The gender roles in my family are seriously dysfunctional and have been for generations. The women tend to be dominant and aggressive, while the men are submissive and try to avoid conflict. My mother learned this from her parents and, in an attempt to raise boys who could speak up and stand up for themselves, became equally domineering. As a result, her sons, including me, struggle with low confidence and passivity, and my sister is following the same pattern. I also see this dynamic with my aunt and cousins. Story 50. Women whose husbands will not help with cooking, cleaning, and childcare because those are considered women's jobs, yet who also work full-time to earn an income because their husbands do not want to be with a gold digger. Gender roles for them but not for me. Shame on those hypocritical husbands. Story 51. It was a failed attempt at a relationship. A woman accused me of assuming she was a lesbian because I had stopped wanting to have sex with her. She had been unkind to me and repeatedly lied about it. She did not want sex either, yet she insisted I was lying. When she finally believed me, she jumped to a convoluted fantasy. Because of her cheating bisexual ex-boyfriend, she thought all men had a fetish for lesbians. Story 52. A man who is expected to always pay for everything is suddenly seen as not good enough if he struggles financially. Story 53. I am regularly told that the amount of work I put into our home and children is only a fraction of what she does because she is the mother. I work 40 hours a week, and when I am home, I am continuously caring for our 3 children. I also help with cooking and cleaning. Story 54. If a man raises his voice to a woman, he is labeled abusive. If a woman insults and hits a man, even in public, he is still labeled abusive. Story 55. My ex wanted me to visit her family for every holiday, but she refused to visit mine for any. Story 56. What consistently bothers me is how much more work women are expected to do than men. My mother and stepdad have both always worked full-time, but the housework, including cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, and grocery shopping, has always been entirely my mother's responsibility. They are now in their 60s. My stepdad is out of work because, as a truck driver, he experiences dizzy spells and fainting episodes, though he is otherwise capable. My mother still does all the housework, though he does some yard work, and she also works full-time while he is home. It drives me crazy. Story 57. The girlfriend constantly disrespected him and even cheated on him while he worked very hard to support her and the 2 children she had before he arrived. He always looked so stressed, and it made me sad because he was such a good person. Story 58. A wife who had served the men at the table then returned to the kitchen to eat alone. Story 59. I have seen people advocate for polygyny, a system in which a man has several wives because they say it would remind women of their place. It forces women to internalize that, apart from God, their husband is the center of their life, but they are not the center of his. They do not have a partner. To themselves, they must share. They are treated as one of his wives, not his only partner or the love of his life. I find this disgusting, especially since those same people call a woman looking at another man cheating while treating a man sleeping with 5 different people as perfectly righteous. Story 60. A couple we know both have jobs and make roughly the same. He is less ambitious than she is and honestly thinks he would be fine being a stay-at-home dad, while she prefers to assume the more traditional male role. But she wants him to earn more or at least as much as she does because he is the man. It seems kind of unfair, to be honest. She is free of gender roles in one way, but still wants him beholden to them. He should be able to be a stay-at-home dad and not be seen as less of a man. Story 61. Fewer men have college degrees, and people often use this as a sign that they cannot cope with the higher education environment, are stupid, or will automatically be low-quality partners. In reality, men without college degrees have higher wages and lifetime earnings than women without college degrees because of the types of jobs they tend to have. Men are not stupid or incapable of earning a degree. They simply make a pragmatic choice not to take on debt when there is an alternative. For women, having no degree is riskier economically, so they tend to have higher educational attainment. We also tend to treat the trades as if they are not educated. This ties back to the widespread idea that men are too dumb or emotionally inept to think or feel their way into healthy interpersonal relationships or a constructive relationship with society. Story 62. 90% of parenting I have seen falls to the woman for some reason. The dishes, the meals, and everything while the man sits on his phone. Story 63. I financially supported my ex's artistic dreams for 15 years while doing most of the household chores, except cooking, which I cleaned up afterward because he always made a huge mess. He cared for our children for a couple of years because we could not afford daycare. That was his story, and he stuck to it. I begged him for years to get a job. I never felt greater relief than when I divorced him, despite the anguish it caused our children. He spent 4 to 8 hours a day playing video games and God knows what else. When I asked for a divorce, he said, "You should have given me 1 more year. I would have made it big." Story 64. As a man in a relationship with another man, the laundry never gets done because there is no default person to do it. Story 65. Reading all these comments makes me realize that most men are terrible husbands. I could not imagine coming home and expecting my wife to do all of the housework while I sit around doing nothing. Story 66. It never ceases to amaze me what some women put up with. Story 67. It was an acrimonious divorce. She cheated on him, and to add insult to injury, she now receives half his pension for the rest of their lives. Sickening. Story 68. I experienced severe depression while I was with my former wife. I was not going to quit my job, but I really wanted to, and I told my former wife. She read advice on Reddit saying men are traditionally the breadwinners and that I should get a second job and work up to 80 hours a week to support our household while suggesting I was being dramatic. Reddit is often, though not always, toxic toward men. Story 69. Not super common, but I don't like that when a woman talks about someone else it is dismissed as just gossip, while when a man says something similar he is labeled an asshole. Women gossip a lot and no one bats an eye. When men gossip, it becomes an issue. Story 70. Women have historically been through the ringer. One smaller, though still unfair, example is how often partners of men say no to hanging art or putting up personal decorations. The same applies to clothing and hair. It is odd how many people I know will throw away their husband's favorite hole-ridden shirt because it embarrasses them, or tell him he cannot wear something or that he needs to shave or get a haircut. Story 71. Women do not realize how powerful their words are for men who care, especially when they are angry. I do not think they know. Even if they feel they are just being emotional, their words can still cause real damage. Women sometimes criticize all men when they want men to oppose a particular group and feel we are not, and that makes us feel awful. On the other hand, their words can make us feel really good, but men rarely hear compliments or appreciation. If a man handles his responsibilities, he is just being an adult. If a woman does, she is seen as strong and an inspiration. We rarely see women defending us. They tend to stick with their sisterhood. Story 72. If a man says it's his house, some people may see it as controlling or oppressive. If a woman says it's her house, others may treat it as a fact and respect her wishes. Story 73. Single or married moms whose husbands are treated like children and do no household chores. Story 74. After reading this thread, people, especially women, should remain single. Story 75. I work with domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. It gets much worse than just unfair. Read the book Why Does He Do That? By Lundy Bancroft. Link to portable document format removed. Story 76. Every child custody hearing I have ever seen or heard about shows that men, at best, receive a fair deal and, at worst, are treated unfairly. There are exceptions, but the bias against men is shocking. I am extremely grateful I have never had to go through that. Story 77. Women carry the majority of the mental load, including child-rearing and other household responsibilities, even when both partners have full-time jobs. Story 78. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, I later learned she had been told it was possible my father would leave her. Statistically, this happens often. Some men become upset when their wives are ill and cannot do as much, so they move on. Story 79. Men make up half of domestic abuse victims and half of all rape victims. Yet there is virtually no space in conversation or public awareness for male victims. There are almost no services or shelters for men, and anyone who raises the issue is often accused of being misogynistic. There is likely a gender empathy gap, where men receive significantly less empathy and sympathy than women who go through the same experiences. This helps explain why the most upvoted comments are almost always about female victims. Male victims receive little if any empathy or sympathy. Gotta love male privilege. Edit. Sources posted in the original comment. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.